Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you just joining us, well, we do a little bit of everything on this channel, including automotive, DIY, pinball, and today, well, we're going in the shop. We're not doing machining, but we're doing some fabrication on some aluminum parts that are completely custom and one-off, guaranteeing that none of you, well, you may guess what it is, but I can assure you, you don't know exactly what it's going to do. Hit that subscribe button down below. When we hit 1,000 subscribers, we're giving away an Amazon gift card and some awesome merch, including hats and some awesome shirts. Now, this is going to be a two-part series. This first part, I'm going to show you all the building of them, how they get put together, how they were designed. The second one, you guys are going to see these things in action, and we're going to have some fun with it. So let's get it. All right, step one is designing this thing. We went through about 4 or 5 iterations of changes, trying to figure out what we wanted for this for the customer. Then we go over to a friend of mine that has a laser because, well, I have a plasma. This type of work does not suit the plasma very well. It's very fine details in some of this stuff and very thin lines. Laser's much better at it. Once we get everything laser cut out, then we head to the shop and we start putting the framework together. So this design is actually a 2-layered design. So this is the first inner layer. It's basically a box within itself with one side that's open. You're going to see me go through here and tack everything up. Basically, I'm going to get everything good and tacked. And then I come back and I will weld this intersection completely out. I say weld it completely out. You weld it, stitching along very well in a lot of places. You want to make sure you have enough weld that the thing doesn't break apart, because these things are going to get beat and banged around. They're not something that is going to go on a shelf and sit. So here we are finishing up this inside box, getting it good and welded. And here we're putting the top on. This is the last piece of this inside box. Stitching it in place. Making sure I got everything good and square like I want it. Good old clamps. Sometimes you got to use these clamps to make sure you get everything pulled around like you need to. And then we go to grinding. So I'm just using the angle grinder here, making sure I clean up all the welds because I don't want any protruding welds in certain areas. When you see here in a second, we build this exoskeleton that goes on it. So I'm just hitting those main areas that those other tubes are going to be at. That way, it doesn't have a chance of hitting and kind of kicking it sideways. We go get some tubing cut, bring it down. Now, what you didn't see is actually 45, some of these. Now, this is actually flat bar. So this is going to be the opening side. This box is going to have a lid that opens up on the small side. And what I'm doing is building the framework for around that opening. Now, I will tell you, I had fought with this thing for the longest time of how we wanted to do this, talking with the customer. We decided this was the best way for what he's doing and how it's working, and it was going to look the best. So we decided to build this out of 1/4 inch by 1 flat bar, basically tacking, welding it together, and then you'll see me come back and actually weld it to the inner box, completing technically the inner box at that point. And once again, I'm just stitching. Now, I do weld all along the sides of this, but on these longer sides, I just stitched along the edges and down the center, which is more than enough weld to hold what these things are going to be doing. And once we get that done, then I flip it over and I actually start working on the back framing portion. So I'm actually using the inner box to make sure I get this framed out how I want it to be. So once I get that all tacked into place, clamp everything down, get it good and tacked like I want it to, then I'll go ahead and weld this piece out. Now you see me here, I'm starting to work on these uprights that are going up, are actually the side portions that the inner box is going to attach to. So I'm just tacking down at the bottom here, making sure I get those in the place that I want to down at the bottom. And then I drop in my top box, and then I tack everything and start welding it out. Now I will tell you, these things took a ton of time to figure out how exactly we're going to do these and the way we wanted to do them. And lots of little welding, especially little spots here and there we had to weld in. So once we get that welded, I want to go back and clean everything up with the angle grinder. So I want to knock down all those welds. I want to blend everything in very nice and neat so I can get a nice smooth tubing transfer. I don't want to see the weld joints. We want to make this thing nice and seamless. So I hit it all with this angle grinder first, and then I come back before I put the paneling on this outside. I come back and hit it with a DA sander or the orbital sander and making sure I get everything a nice seamless finish. I want a nice clean finish that everything matches and looks great together. So get that done. And here we are. We are starting to put the top panel on. So this design, like I said, has an inner box and an outer layer. So there's a 1-inch gap between the inner and outer, and there's a very specific reason for that. We'll get into that a little bit later of why this thing is designed the way it is. But we're going to get this top welded in, and then we're going to move along to the sides, weld those outer panels on these sides here, get them in place, get them tacked in. Once again, I'm not welding these things all the way down, but I do stitch the corners, around the corners, and then down through the middle. I put a couple stitches there just to make sure these things are going to hold up and last. Like I said, we want to make sure these things are going to last a very long time. They get beat up, thrown around, they get moved a lot. So making sure these things hold up for the lifetime. And finally, the last piece of the panel for the main box is going in. Now, if you notice, each side or the opposing side has the same design as the other side. So that way it flows through. If you look through it, you don't really have technically an obstruction. It's just the picture goes through on both sides. But we're getting this last piece welded in, and that will conclude the main box, other than doing the finish grinding and the finish sanding to get that last little bit of finish where we've added the weld to. But then we jump to the door. Already got this thing welded up. Just going to clean everything up once again with the grinder, making sure we get it nice and smooth. Hit it with the DA sander, the orbital sander, making sure we get a nice finish on it. Because the last thing I want is this thing having 2 different finishes on each piece. So we want it all nice, seamless finish. And then here we are, this thing, same thing with the door. The door has a double panel on it. Safety reasons. The only panel that doesn't get a double panel is the bottom. It's actually a single level on the bottom. So that's the only place. Once again, there's reasons behind the way it was designed that way, but it didn't need a double panel down there for how these things are used. And here we are, the last little bit. Just finish grinding those welds out like we talked about, and we're going to go back and hit them with the orbital sander, getting that nice, beautiful finish that we want. And the last and final piece of welding is actually putting this door on. So we weld this hinge on, making sure we got that in the right place, and making sure it functions like we want it to. And we weld everything up on that. And then aside from that, there you go, boys and girls. Now here's the final finished design. Now you see there are handles on this that you didn't see me put on, and there are latches because these things have to be locked up. Now if you guys guessed this thing was snake cages, well, you're sort of right, but they're not meant to house or to transport or anything of that nature. They're actually used for training. And I'm not going to get too much into that because in the next video, we're going to meet with the guy I built these for, and we're going to see these things in action and actually talk to him about how these things are used and how they've been for him. Because in the past, he had been using wood and I think chicken wire. And when you're putting venomous snakes in there, he wanted something a little bit more robust and something that was going to last him a lifetime, which these should do. So that's going to do it for this one. We'll catch you next time.